and welcome to the Art of Being Human. I'm going to continue from what I left off in the last segment about being a widow, being a widower, and what it does to you, and how do you get healthy again and live normal life again, and what does this healing take? How long does it take? It takes quite a while. But I also want to go through the disease process that Joyce Brothers' husband went through, just to talk about it a little bit. Because if you are married and your spouse gets sick, then you're probably going to be the caregiver, the main caregiver, unless they're hospitalized or put in a nursing home or something like that. Most people would rather stay home. Most people can't afford to go into a nursing home because they take all your money, actually. If you have Social Security, most of it goes to the home, so they get paid, and of course that has to be. But at any rate, what is the symptoms? Well, if a person has cancer, he had cancer, and of course usually you have a certain amount of surgery, chemotherapy, followed by radiation. The chemotherapy comes first because it'll shrink the tumor, and then the radiation comes after that, and then usually surgery to remove the tumor if they can. That's if it hasn't metastasized, that has gone over to the body. You know, if it spreads here and spreads there, then up to a certain level, you can't do anything anymore except treat the body as a whole and make the person comfortable, because the cancer will take over. Eventually it will take over. So he had chemotherapy, and his symptoms were these. And if you've ever had it, or if you know people that have it, this is going to sound real familiar to you. The nausea is terrible, and there's medications given to stop the nausea and to stop the vomiting. There's a lot of tiredness, weakness, the hair falls out, and hiccups. Now, I hadn't known too much about the hiccups, but people who have hiccups, they can't stop. And it exhausts them. It becomes exhausting. And eventually, of course, he as a doctor had to close his office because he was just too weak to continue with it. And she didn't close her practice, but what she did do was she cut back on it a lot so she could spend time with him. She never wanted to leave him. She felt terrible if she left him. If she had an appointment or she was scheduled to do a seminar, then she would go and do the seminar. If it had been previously scheduled, she wouldn't schedule any new things. But if it had been previously scheduled, she would do it, you know. And the thing is, she hated to leave him. And people would say to her, well, isn't it good that you get a break? You know, you have a break from taking care of him. Someone else can take care of him, and then you can go off and do something, and you have that kind of a break. But she didn't feel that way at all. She didn't want to leave him at all. She didn't want to have any kind of a break. Either a family member would come in, because she didn't want him to ever be alone. So a family member would come in and watch him and be with him, or she would hire nursing skills, and she had the money to do that. You know, if you have the money, you can do a lot more than if you don't have money in this society. And she would hire skilled nurses, specialized nurses, to come in and care for him. Then what she would do, and only a person who had a good income could do this, she might hire a private plane to take her to her seminar and to take her back, so she wouldn't be spending a lot of time at airports. She had a direct link, you know, to the airport, which is as close to where she was staying. And of course, they lived in New York, but they had a farm in another state and so forth, and they were back and forth. But she could always hire a private plane if she wanted to. And they never talked about his upcoming death. You would think they would want to do that, just to clarify things. Now, recently, a few months ago, I did a funeral for a doctor that I had known for a long time. I was his patient, one of his patients. He retired, moved on to Florida, and since he was retiring, I was moving, because I was moving up to this area, and so we kind of parted ways. But for some reason, he never forgot me, and I hadn't seen him for about 20 years. And then I got the word through a series of circumstances that he was dying of cancer, had returned to the state, and he wanted me to do his funeral. They didn't know how to reach me. They didn't know where I was. But through a series of circumstances that I don't need to discuss, it just happened to work out, they were able to find me. And I did agree to do his funeral. And that I asked if he wanted to see me before his death. He did want to see me before his death. But as soon as he found out that I was going to do his funeral, then he kind of slipped into a coma and he never really woke up. And I think it's because he was insistent. I don't care what you do, but I want her to do my funeral. I want her to do my funeral. And so I did the funeral. I was able to do that for him. And what I did in the funeral, because I emphasize life after death, because being a Christian, I believe in it, and most of them did as well, so I talk about that. I'm very free to talk about that. But of course, if you're doing a funeral, you have to do what the family wants. But what I decided to do, and they agreed with it, is toward the end of the funeral, I would spend maybe 3 or 4 minutes, not very long, and time in terms of talking about healing from grief and how do you do it. And I've started to do this. I don't do too many funerals. I'm basically trying to retire, but I do some, and I'm including that. How do you know that you're getting well from grief? How do you know that you're shifting? You know, your mode is shifting. And I think if you're in that position, if you can spend time thinking about other things other than the bereaved, if you can think about the meeting you have to go to next week, or whatever thing you're planning to do with your grandchildren, or whatever it is, you start to think about life as it is instead of being constantly thinking about the person who has died. When the death occurs, all the thoughts are toward the death. All the thoughts about the person who has died, that's what fills your mind. You don't think about anything else. You think about how that person was. That's why people say you'll have him forever in your heart, which, as I said before, I don't think is a comforting thing to say. But people do it all the time, and I understand that, and I understand the reasons for it. But I don't think it's as comforting as it needs to be. But then at the end of the funeral, I'll say, how do you know you can heal? Grief is hard to heal from, but you can heal. How can you heal? How can you know that you're healing? When you start to think about something else instead of just the bereaved person. You know, you think about things that you're going to do, or things that you need to do, or things that you had planned to do. And it's like you're stepping outside of the grief modality, if I can call it that, into something that's fresher, newer, more like your daily life would be if the death hadn't occurred. So when you can start thinking about other things instead of thinking about the person who died, you are on your step toward healing. The healing from grief is very specific, and grief is very deep, and it's very strong. But once you start to get over it and you can think about other things, then it isn't as long-lasting as a depression would be. It's sharp, it's horrible, it's hard to deal with, and then it fades off. Why does it fade off? Because you come to a point where you can do something else. You can do something else. You can think about something else. You can plan something else. I'll take my grandchildren out for ice cream. I'll have a hamburger with a friend of mine. We'll go out to eat. I'll attend a meeting that maybe I hadn't been able to attend because of what was going on with my husband's health or my wife's health or whatever it is. You know, so you start to think and act like a person who's engaged in life again, not in that mode of death, death, death. And then you know that you're starting to heal, because that will increase, that will continue. You'll continue to think about life. You'll continue to make plans in terms of your schedule. You'll continue to get back to what was normal life for you. Now, it may change a lot. And the reason it may change is that now maybe you have to work more hours than you did before. Or now maybe you have to change cars. You don't have somebody else to help you in terms of choosing a car. You have to do it on your own. Or now you have to face finances in a different kind of way because there's a person no longer there that you share that responsibility with. Now you have to take out your own garbage when maybe your husband did it before. You know, there's a lot of things that may change, and that takes some getting used to. But then when you start getting used to it, that becomes normal life. Yes, I take out my own garbage. Yes, I pay my own bills. I don't depend upon anyone to do it now because I don't have anyone who normally would do it. So therefore, I have to take on the responsibilities that that person who died usually did. I take on those responsibilities, and now that becomes normal life for me. Well, maybe I can't stay in my house. Maybe my 10-room house is too big. So maybe I need to switch to an apartment. They always say, and I agree with the people when they say it, don't make major decisions for at least a year after a death, because your decisions are going to be based upon your grief process. Not upon reality so much, but based upon your grief process, where you are in that process. But there might be a time when you have to, due to financial reasons, make a decision that won't wait for a year. Maybe you have to sell a house. Maybe you have to move into a small apartment. Maybe things like that financially are such that you have to take care of those things now. And if you do, then you have to do what you have to do, but rely on other people to help you. Try not to do things alone. If you can put off a big decision for a year, you're much better to do that if you can. And I realize that in some circumstances you can't. If you can wait that long, it's good. Because now, after a year, after 12 months has passed, you have much clearer vision. You have much more clarity in your thought processes because you're not so much mixed up in the grief process, which will taint your normal thought processes because you're referring basically to the grief process. Now, a funeral can be a really good help to people. It can give you the closure that you need. And it's too bad, I think, that people are shying away from it and not having funerals. It's a way for them to stay away from the pain of the funeral. But if they get through the pain of the funeral, they can do much better in terms of health. And they can have much more closure. But you have good funerals and you have funerals that are not so good. And if you have a good funeral, it does a lot to help in the healing process. People are embarrassed in a way they don't know what to say. They can't say anything that's going to be really comforting because they can't give you what you want. You want your spouse there. You want your loved one there. Whoever it was that died, you want them there. They can't be there. I can remember speaking at a funeral, and this is not so long ago, and a friend of mine spoke at the funeral as well, and she said, I want her here now. I want her here in front of me. I want to be able to touch her. And of course, she was crying as she was saying all of that. I didn't focus on that. I focused on, now this person is gone. What do we do now? And what I focused was, we hold each other up. We're all in grief. We're all in grief, so why not hold each other up? And then I gave the example of the redwood trees in California. They're tall, they're huge. People build roads through them. How do they stand up? Well, they have roots. They all have clusters of roots, and the roots intertwine with each other, and they hold each other up. And then I reference the fact that we can do it too. All of us who are in grief, we could hold each other up. Because when one is having a good day, they can share that with somebody who's not having a good day. And what helps one person may not help another person, but we help each other. And so we can do that, and we hold each other up, and then remember the fact that there is a reunion coming. There is such a thing as an afterlife. You will see your loved one again, especially if you're a Christian, you will see them again. And that's the case. That's the case as it's presented in the Bible, and I do believe that to be true. So there are ways of helping a people. You just have to know where they're at and what they're feeling, in as much as you're able to do that, to intervene in a way that's most helpful for them. So going back to the disease process that her husband had, the disease process, he went through the chemo, and of course he had the symptoms of going through the chemo, and then the cancer hit the bones. Now my grandmother died of cancer, and she had bone cancer, and bone cancer is terribly, terribly, terribly painful. My mother used to say people could hear her screaming down the street because she was screaming so loud because of the pain she suffered. But you've got to remember, my mother died at 91 years old. Her mother died much before that, so that the method of pain management is much more sophisticated now than it was then. But bone cancer is terribly painful, and so he had to take many medications in order to stop the pain or to help the pain to stop. That's the main focus when a person is actually going through that dying process. Kill the pain and let them have a comfortable life as much as you can. And then he went through many tests to find out if the treatment worked, blood tests, all kinds of tests. And then there would be the worrying and the waiting to see what the test results showed, and if they showed the cancer spread or the cancer had been stopped for a while. And so the test was supposed to show that. So they waited and waited and waited, and it was agony to wait for the test results to come back, while taking medication to stop pain, while taking medication to stop the cancer from growing, and to try to get relief from the cancer and beat it out, to recover from it. Some people can recover from cancer, and I know a lot of people who do natural methods of healing for cancer, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. The problem with the natural healing methods is that each person is different, so their response to natural healing methods is going to be different. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes not. Most of the people that I know of that have used natural health methods, they haven't had any more success than the chemo has. But I don't know about all cases either. Some people can be successful in doing it that way. But you have to do what you have to do, I guess, in order to preserve your life for as long as you can. And so usually he went through the chemo, all of the various tests in which they found out that what he was taking was not working, and that it had spread to his bones, and that was painful, so that's extra medication in order to stop the pain of the cancer. And then he, of course, would grasp at anything to help him to live longer. Who wouldn't? I had a friend of mine who died of cancer, and she was drinking some kind of water that had been adapted. They did something to the water so that it would be more cleansing, and a lot of people claim that when they drank that water, they got rid of their cancer. Now, I don't know what they did to the water, but at any rate, she was buying pints and gallons of this water that she was drinking, but it didn't seem to be helping her any. But some people, I guess, do get help like that. The other thing is he became weaker, thinner, cranky, angry. Anger is a part of the death process. It is a part. People get angry. Well, what do they get angry at? I think that they get angry at the loss that they're going to experience. Fearful and angry at the loss that they experience. If you lose somebody, like you lose your husband, you lose your wife, you lose your friend, you miss them, and it is a terrible loss. But they're losing everything. they're losing everything. They won't have a consciousness on earth. They won't have what they normally have. They won't have a daily schedule they can go to. They won't have a phone where they can pick up and say, let's talk for a while. Let's go out for a cup of coffee. And I can imagine that for some people, when they realize the quality of their life has been good, now they're going to be missing everything, how angry they can get. So you can't be angry at yourself, because what good does that do? You can't be angry at the doctors and the nurses that are taking care of you, because, let's face it, you're dependent on them. And if you're dependent on them, just how is the anger going to help? And so the anger usually is focused on family members and caregivers that are related to you and that are the closest to you. Why? Because they're not going to reject you. They have to, in a sense, put up with the anger of the patient, but at the same time, realize that they're probably not going to be rejected. So focus the anger at those who won't be rejecting you and who will still be there to take care of you, even if you're angry. And it gets twisted around that way. Now, eventually, of course, the person becomes sicker and weaker, and eventually, for him, he would ask for his wife. But the thing is, she was right there, and he didn't know it. He had gone to the point where he didn't recognize her. He was sick enough that he did not recognize his own wife standing by his side. And eventually, he just got weaker and weaker and, go into coma. And no matter what they did, it wouldn't work. So when you get to that point, then the idea is just to keep a person as comfortable as they can, and you have to let them go. And that's what she did. She had to let him go. That's when the pain really begins. For some people, the death is going to be a relief. It's going to be a relief. If you see somebody that's been suffering a lot, it's kind of, in a sense, a relief when they go, because you're not watching them suffer anymore. And you're saying they're out of their suffering, so therefore they have been relieved of their suffering. You have been relieved of watching them suffer. And so in a way that tends to be a relief. But at the same time, they're gone, and now you have to face the fact that they're not there anymore. Not really. Sometimes, even if they're sick, the fact that they're still alive is a comfort, because you still have them there, even though they're not well. But then when they pass on, then you have to face the fact that this is it. This is the end, and this person is no longer here. And then the real grief begins. The real grief, sometimes you have an anticipatory grief if your loved one has cancer or some other terminal illness. You have an anticipatory grief because at some point they're going to be gone. But also, the fact that they're there and they haven't gone stretches that out a bit. And then you have the comfort of knowing that they're still with you. So it gets twisted around in many different ways. And I want to get into that, but we're just about out of time now. So I want to close it here. We're going to continue with this next time, maybe 1 or 2 more segments about it, and then how you can straighten out and get relief and go back into normal activity again and heal as much as you can from the grief that you have. This is what this is focused on. I'm sorry I have to go into things that are painful to hear, but at the same time, I can be compassionate because I've been through all of this too. This is not news for me at all. So at any rate, we'll continue with this next time. There is hope for grief. You can recover. So please join me next time.